For decades, China and North Korea have been locked in a fragile but necessary alliance, one built on war, survival, and cold geopolitical calculations. The world assumed this partnership was unbreakable, a strategic bond too valuable for Beijing to abandon. But what if I told you that China is quietly pulling away? That behind the diplomatic smiles and political speeches, Beijing is making moves that could leave North Korea stranded like never before? It sounds unthinkable, right? After all, China has been North Korea's economic lifeline, its shield against global sanctions, its only real ally. But something has changed. Beijing is no longer willing to pay the price for Pyongyang's reckless behavior. With trade sanctions tightening and global influence on the line, China is slowly shifting its priorities. The cracks in this alliance are no longer rumors. They are real, and they are widening fast. But here's the real question. What happens next? If China truly cuts North Korea loose, does Pyongyang collapse? Does it lash out in desperation? Or is there an even bigger, more calculated strategy unfolding beneath the surface? The truth is, most people have no idea how deep this story goes. But you're about to uncover the moves that could reshape the balance of power in Asia forever. For over 7 decades, China and North Korea have been locked in a high-stakes geopolitical dance. This isn't just about friendship. It's a calculated strategic alliance. North Korea serves as a buffer, keeping U.S. military influence at bay, while China provides economic dependence that keeps Pyongyang afloat. But let's be real. This relationship is less about loyalty and more about necessity. The question is, what happens when necessity starts to fade? China's role in North Korea's survival is undeniable. Back in the Cold War, their bond was forged in fire, with China stepping in during the Korean War to prevent an American-led takeover. Since then, Beijing has been Pyongyang's lifeline, offering trade, resources, and political cover. But times have changed. China now aims to solidify its global diplomacy, while North Korea remains stuck in Cold War paranoia. This mismatch is starting to show, and the cracks are widening fast. Now, China faces a dilemma. Keep supporting North Korea and risk economic consequences, or distance itself and lose a key strategic piece. With military tensions rising and trade sanctions tightening, Beijing's patience is running thin. But here's the real kicker. If China pulls the plug, what happens next? A total collapse of North Korea? A desperate move that shocks the world? Stay with me, because what you're about to discover will change the way you see global power forever. China and North Korea may share history, but their present tells a different story. Beijing wants to be seen as a responsible global power, securing economic deals and influencing global diplomacy. Meanwhile, Pyongyang thrives on unpredictability, testing missiles, defying trade sanctions, and provoking military tensions. This contrast is becoming harder to ignore. How long can China tolerate a partner that constantly pulls it into controversy? For years, China defended North Korea on the world stage, softening sanctions and shielding it from Western pressure. But now, that loyalty is starting to cost Beijing. With every nuclear test, North Korea pushes China further into a diplomatic corner, forcing it to explain the actions of a government it can't fully control. It's like an older brother constantly making excuses for a reckless sibling. Sooner or later, patience runs out. Behind closed doors, frustration is mounting. While China seeks economic partnerships with the West, North Korea continues its aggressive isolationism. Beijing knows that distancing itself could improve its global reputation, but cutting ties completely could create chaos at its border. This isn't just a policy debate, it's a ticking time bomb. And if you think things are complicated now, wait until you see how this all began. This alliance didn't just happen overnight, it was forged in war. When the Korean War erupted in 1950, China made a bold move, sending hundreds of thousands of troops to stop the U.S. and its allies from taking over the North. This wasn't just about ideology, it was about survival. A U.S.-controlled Korea at China's doorstep was a nightmare scenario. So, Beijing stepped in, and from that moment, North Korea became more than just a neighbor. It became a strategic shield. The war ended in 1953, but the partnership between China and North Korea was cemented. While the West turned South Korea into an economic powerhouse, the North doubled down on militarization and isolation. China, though skeptical of Pyongyang's extreme policies, continued to support it, knowing that a stable North Korea meant a secure Chinese border. But let's be honest, how much of this was really about loyalty, and how much was just cold, hard geopolitics? Fast forward to today, and that old wartime alliance is starting to look like a relic of the past. China has transformed into a global superpower, while North Korea remains locked in its old ways, pushing the limits with missile tests and nuclear threats. But here's where it gets wild. North Korea isn't just a political headache for China, it's an economic burden. And when money talks, even the strongest alliances start to crack. If you're enjoying this deep dive into global power plays, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because the next chapter in this story is even more shocking, and you don't want to miss it. The economic gap between North and South Korea is nothing short of staggering. While South Korea thrives as one of the world's leading economies, boasting a GDP of over $1.7 trillion, North Korea remains trapped in economic stagnation, with an estimated GDP of just $30 billion. That's not just a gap, it's an abyss. While Seoul is home to tech giants like Samsung and Hyundai, Pyongyang relies on outdated industries, state-controlled production, and heavy economic dependence on China just to survive. China sees this disparity as both an opportunity and a liability. On one hand, a weak North Korea ensures reliance on Beijing, keeping Pyongyang under its influence. On the other, North Korea's outdated economy makes it unpredictable and fragile, constantly teetering on the edge of collapse. Unlike South Korea, which fuels global diplomacy through innovation and trade, North Korea remains isolated, cut off by its own policies and international trade sanctions. This leaves Beijing with an uncomfortable question. How much longer can it afford to prop up an economy that refuses to modernize? For China, the stakes are high. Keeping North Korea afloat costs resources, but abandoning it could trigger instability at its border, something Beijing dreads. Meanwhile, Pyongyang's refusal to embrace economic reform makes it a growing burden rather than a strategic asset. This isn't just about politics anymore. It's about numbers, power, and a partnership that's starting to look more like dead weight than a strategic advantage. And as China reassesses its priorities, one reality becomes clear. Economic survival is now the biggest battleground. The balance of power in East Asia is shifting, and China is feeling the pressure. For decades, Beijing was North Korea's primary ally, but recent developments are challenging that dynamic. Pyongyang has been strengthening its ties with Russia, securing military and economic support that reduces its reliance on China. This new alliance complicates Beijing's role. North Korea is no longer a dependent state with limited options, but a player seeking alternative backers in a rapidly evolving geopolitical landscape. Meanwhile, the West isn't sitting idly by. In 2023, the United States solidified a trilateral security alliance with Japan and South Korea, creating a powerful counterforce in the region. This move sent a clear message to Beijing. The balance of military tensions is shifting, and China's influence over North Korea is being challenged from multiple directions. While China still holds economic leverage over Pyongyang, its grip on regional strategy is no longer as firm as it once was. As China watches these developments unfold, it faces a critical dilemma: double down on its support for North Korea or step back and realign its regional strategy. The rise of new power dynamics means that Beijing can no longer dictate terms as easily as before. North Korea, once an isolated state with nowhere to turn, now has more options than ever. The question is, how will China adapt to a game where it is no longer the only player controlling the board? China's global ambitions go far beyond North Korea. As the world's second-largest economy, Beijing is focused on securing trade partnerships, attracting foreign investment, and maintaining stability. North Korea, with its unpredictable behavior and constant military tensions, is becoming more of a liability than an asset. Every missile test, every provocation puts China in an awkward position, forcing it to defend a regime that threatens the very stability Beijing seeks to maintain. For years, China tolerated North Korea's actions, using its alliance as a strategic buffer against Western influence in Asia. But the cost of that support is rising. Trade sanctions tied to Pyongyang's behavior have created obstacles for Beijing's economic diplomacy, making it harder to strengthen ties with Europe and the United States. Simply put, China needs the global economy more than it needs North Korea, and that realization is starting to shape its decisions. Beijing now faces a tough choice: maintain its historical ties with North Korea or distance itself to protect its economic future. The signals are clear. China has slowly reduced aid, enforced sanctions, and even criticize Pyongyang's reckless moves. It's a shift that suggests Beijing is rethinking its priorities. But does this mean China is finally ready to cut ties for good? Or is there still a deeper strategy at play? China's influence over North Korea isn't what it used to be. Pyongyang is no longer entirely dependent on Beijing, as its growing relationship with Russia offers new military and economic opportunities. This shift weakens China's leverage and raises concerns about whether North Korea will act more unpredictably, knowing it has alternative support. Beijing now finds itself in a complicated position, losing grip on an ally it once controlled. Meanwhile, the U.S. and its allies are strengthening their regional presence. The trilateral alliance between the U.S., Japan, and South Korea signals a united front against North Korean aggression, indirectly challenging China's influence. Beijing must now navigate a geopolitical chessboard where its ability to dictate terms is shrinking. Its strategic calculations are no longer just about North Korea, but about maintaining its own standing in a rapidly shifting global order. China's patience is wearing thin. Pyongyang's constant defiance, coupled with growing international pressure, has forced Beijing to reconsider its role. Economic interests and diplomatic ambitions now outweigh the benefits of maintaining a fragile alliance with North Korea. The question isn't just whether China will distance itself. It's how far Beijing is willing to go before Pyongyang becomes more of a threat than an ally. China's economic ambitions are bigger than any single alliance. As the country pushes to dominate global trade, its ties to North Korea have become more of a burden than a benefit. Beijing wants stronger relations with Europe, the U.S., and other economic powerhouses, something that's harder to achieve when it's linked to an unpredictable regime under heavy international sanctions. Every move Pyongyang makes puts China in an uncomfortable position, forcing it to choose between loyalty and global influence. For decades, Beijing balanced this relationship, providing just enough support to keep North Korea afloat while avoiding full endorsement of its actions. But now, China is making subtle shifts, cutting certain trade flows, enforcing sanctions more strictly, and even publicly signaling frustration with Pyongyang's aggressive stance. It's a clear sign that China's priorities are evolving. Stability and economic dominance matter more than protecting a rogue state that refuses to change. The bigger picture is clear. China is playing a long game. It has built itself into an economic powerhouse by making calculated moves, and North Korea is no longer a key piece in that strategy. While Beijing won't sever ties overnight, the writing is on the wall. The world is watching. Will China finally cut the cord? Or is there another layer to this geopolitical puzzle? So, now you know, China and North Korea's alliance isn't as solid as it seems. The economic dependence, the strategic alliance, the unbreakable bond? It's all being tested, and the cracks are getting harder to ignore. But here's the thing. Most people have no idea this is happening. They still believe in the old narrative, the Cold War mindset, the illusion of an eternal partnership. But you see the bigger picture now. You understand the power shifts, the hidden strategies, and what's truly at stake. And that puts you ahead of the curve. Because history isn't shaped by what's obvious. It's shaped by the moves happening behind closed doors, the decisions made in secret meetings, and the alliances that are built or broken without the world even realizing. The truth is, this is just one of the many global power plays happening right now. There are countless other stories, just as shocking, just as hidden from the public eye, waiting to be uncovered. The kind of knowledge that only a select few take the time to understand. So, if you want to keep seeing beyond the headlines, to truly grasp the forces shaping our world, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because the next time history shifts, you won't just be watching it happen. You'll already know why.